Hey,
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Stranger Stories. I'm Fallon Masterson. This
I'm
is,
Judee Burr.
and we are so excited to virtually bring you tonight's show. If this is your first Stranger Stories, we are normally a storytelling series that is held every other month throughout Rhode Island that showcases writers who are sharing their own absolutely true stories on a given theme. Judee and I began the series in May 2018, which makes tonight's show our 2-year anniversary and extra special to us. Our theme for tonight is flight, and it definitely seems appropriate for a time where we're all stuck inside and dreaming of things far, far away. With everything that's going on, our hearts go out to everyone who's been impacted by the pandemic, and it definitely feels more important than ever for us to stay connected through community and through storytelling. The show tonight was actually supposed to be held at Askew back in March, and then was supposed to be held at May at AS220. And in the spirit of bringing us together, we simply could not wait anymore to get this lineup of readers to you. So, a big thank you to WACS TV 15 for helping us facilitate tonight's show.
Yes, a big thank you. Um, and we're so excited about the lineup tonight. As we always say at our shows, true stories, which these are, they run the gamut. They can be sad, they can be sexy, they can be funny. So just get ready to hear these stories tonight that run the whole spectrum of life's experiences. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, please interact with us. We can't see you, but we want to feel your energy. You can make a comment, you can virtually clap and encourage our readers. And our behind the scenes director at DoubleACS, Austin Ricketts, he just might display your kind and encouraging comment live during the show. So feel free to interact with us that way.
And there is also another way to interact with us tonight. For anyone who's been to the live show, you are familiar that we feature folks' tiny true stories on the night's theme. So if you have a short story that happened to you based on the theme flight that you want to share with us, keep it between 2 to 5 sentences. Email us at strangerstoriespbd@gmail.com, and Judee and I will read some of those through the night. We have some really fun things that have came in through the day, so hopefully a few more of you submit, and we would love to share them.
Great. So with that, I'm so excited to introduce our first reader. Andie Armstrong is currently working as a brain researcher and writes in her free time. Her work has most recently appeared in Daily Science Fiction, Corvid Queen, Terse, and others. Please welcome tonight's first reader, Andie.
Hi. So quick mention, about a minute and a half ago, my power went out in my house. So awesome timing. I'm on my phone right now. If it dies, that is why. I did not drop out. All right, so I'm just going to start with the balloon epiphany. Thank you to everybody who's watching. When I was 7, I found an X-Files episode guide at our local library. And that's how I learned the words synopsis and syzygy, which I immediately proceeded to lord over my friends because that's how 7-year-old me got her kicks, I guess. In retaliation, one friend picked up her mom's med school textbook and hit back with a list of multisyllabic phobias. That was how I first learned about acrophobia, or fear of heights. Now, back then, I used to ride my bike across the roof of our apartment building every time someone left the roof door unlocked. I climbed giant poplars for hide and seek, and my dream was to grow up and become Superman because he could fly. So, fear of heights seemed less plausible to me than fear of cheese or turophobia, which was also a real thing on that list of phobias, or fear of the Pope. Acrophobia, I decided, was something that fakers did to get attention. Fast forward 15 years, I gave up roof biking, but I tried ski lifts and planes, cable cars over cliffs, and that Toronto tower with the glass floors, and none of those had changed my mind about the implausibility of fearing heights. Unless you're being dangled from a skyscraper by a movie supervillain, there's no excuse to be scared. Such was my opinion about acrophobia at the end of senior year of college. Then, that summer, my friends took me to the Philadelphia Zoo. Now, as far as settings for humbling epiphanies go, the Philly Zoo seems unlikely. It's sunny and green, and it has ice cream truck music playing on the speakers. It also stands only about 20 feet above sea level, which makes it a tricky candidate to teach me about heights. But it did, and here's how. Among its many less traumatizing attractions, the Philly Zoo used to offer hot air balloon rides. Spoiler alert, hot air balloon rides are an excellent way to gain a quick and personal understanding of acrophobia. That is not advertised in the zoo flyers. Now, in their defense, they do ask at the balloon ticket booth if you're scared of heights. If you say no, they ask, are you sure? And if you're a smug jerk who scoffs and says, who would be afraid of heights? They still make you read and sign a disclaimer. So it's really hard to blame the zoo for what happened next. In my defense, I had dangled in a tiny iron bucket built by Soviets over a 5,000-foot drop in the Carpathian Mountains with no problems. So when I said I was not scared of heights, I was speaking from a place of honesty. Thus, I proceeded to embark, along with 3 friends and a handful of other guests, plus a balloon guide, into what they called the basket of the balloon. A misleading term because baskets are tightly woven and they have solid sides, whereas the ratty little box we boarded had walls made of transparent mesh, held together by chains several feet apart. It looked, if anything, like a bag of mosquito mesh under a giant balloon. I'm sure the balloon guide issued some safety instructions before we got off the ground, but as abject panic tends to mess with one's subsequent memory of events, I don't recall exactly what those instructions were. I just know at some point I found myself staring out through the flimsy mesh at the tops of trees gently falling lower and lower. Our balloon guide looked strangely like Keanu Reeves, which filled me with undeserved confidence. Because if there's someone you want with you when you're ascending to the heavens in a mosquito mesh box, it's Keanu Reeves. The dozen of balloon riders spread along the edges of the basket, admiring the view. Keanu told us to keep moving so everybody could see all the different angles. So we walked a slow, steady circle around the basket, like ants on the sugary rim of a cocktail glass. After our first revolution around the balloon, a silent understanding spread among us. We had admired the angles sufficiently and wanted to just pick a spot and stand still. But no one dared read the revolt against Keanu's orders, so we kept shuffling, sidestep after sidestep, in this surreal, awkward march around the balloon. About 2 minutes into this trip, as we'd risen some 100 feet in the air and were still going, my elation at this new experience began to entertain a trace of doubt. Surely we couldn't go much higher. The view was great already, and I felt confident there was nothing in the stratosphere that we couldn't admire just fine from our current altitude. But the balloon kept rising. Another minute later, my doubt had turned to silent panic. I couldn't see the trees anymore, which made me realize just how high we'd gotten. And suddenly it occurred to me, a mosquito's mesh and some chains were not much defense if we were to say plummet to our fiery balloon deaths. Unfortunately, the gravity of my realization was matched only by my utter inability to do anything about it. And the balloon kept rising. Then at last came the epiphany. From one moment to the next, I shed 15 years of deep contempt towards acrophobia and replaced them with sudden and stunning Sir Newton by the apple tree understanding. People who feared heights were not wimpy or dramatic, they were misunderstood prophets. Altitude was the silent enemy, and they had been trying to warn us all along. If you've never had this realization while floating precariously 300 feet above ground in a creaky balloon, I envy you. The rest of this story does not paint me in a great light, so we're going to glaze over it. Needless to say, when one discovers a sudden healthy fear of heights under those circumstances, some things might occur, including but not limited to freezing, swearing, hyperventilating, questioning the sanity of Keanu Reeves, mentioning the myth of Icarus several times, repeating this isn't the goddamn Wizard of Oz, and some mild dry heaving. Despite my disruptive manifestations, which were Keanu's words, not mine, the balloon ascended to just over 400 feet. For reference, that is the tallest building in Providence, the Superman building. Please imagine floating on its roof in a shaky basket with nothing but a creaky wooden floor beneath you and transparent mesh on all sides. We stayed there about 12 hours, or as my friends call it, a minute. Then we made our way back to blessed terra firma, which I'm sure felt great, but unfortunately, due to panic, I can't recall anything from the descent except Keanu scowling at me and telling me not to throw up. A few take home messages. First, people who fear heights are right, and I would like to offer them a heartfelt apology. You are the Cassandras to our Trojan hubris. Secondly, if you do go on a hot air balloon ride and do not return with a new phobia, you are probably some sort of superhero and you should use your powers for good. Finally, if you hate fun and safety and hearing this story has somehow made you want to try the experience, you can't. The Philly Zoo actually retired their balloon soon after that, following frequent malfunctions and what I can only assume were many disruptively manifesting customers. As for me, I'm now in a love-hate relationship with heights. Part of me, the roof biking part, still can't believe they scare me, so I keep challenging myself to confront heights. Because I am a spiteful sort of neurotic. My new goal is to scale a climbing wall and see how I do at the top. So it's likely that at some point I'll either have a great climbing story or a story of how the fire department had to coax me down, shrieking and flailing, from an indoor gym wall. Odds are on the latter, honestly, but I'm going to try it anyway. Thank you.
Andie, thank you so much. I'm glad that you stayed on the whole time.
Oh my goodness. So I'm on my phone. We still have, that's why it's so dark here. We have no power. The entire neighborhood is out of power.
Good luck. Oh my God.
Yeah, fun times. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks to Andie. I'm going to introduce our next reader. Our next reader is a writer and a digital producer who also happens to produce this show. She's currently working on a series of essays about being pregnant in a pandemic, which she's sure you'll hear pieces of in the future, and she promises they're not as grim as they sound. Please welcome back your co-host, Fallon.
Thank you, Judee. So when I board a plane, I look for a certain type of seatmate. I prefer airlines with open seating where I can choose my own surroundings, guided by intuition and a set of rules to help me feel like I have control over the in-flight experience. My first personal panic began on a harrowing December 23rd in O'Hare Airport, when after years of otherwise successful flying, I came down with a case of claustrophobia that's persisted ever since. People were everywhere. There was nowhere to sit, nowhere to stand. I wanted to escape, rent a car, drive the rest of the way to New England. My body temperature soared and crashed, and I kept taking off and putting on my jacket. I threw up in a trash can, and for good measure, vomited again once I got on the plane. The flight to Providence was short, but felt longer with a warm bag of puke in my hands. The woman beside me pretended not to notice, despite the fact that we were literally touching arm to arm, which I remember thinking was an act of misplaced kindness. But more than anything, I wished that the middle seat next to me was empty. Did this woman really need to be victimized by listening to me splatter airport food into a paper bag? Would it have been even worse if she tried to comfort me? In subsequent years, I've deployed a methodology to heighten my chances of having a free middle seat. My most reliable is to head straight to the back of the plane. The way back, where most people dread sitting because they're afraid they'll miss a connection. You find someone sitting in an aisle seat that it looks like no one would ever want to sit next to, slide confidently by your target, take that window seat, and cross your fingers the plane gets filled before the middle gets taken. Usually the system works and leads to smoother traveling, but not always. I'm on a connecting flight home from Charlotte in 2014. The back of the plane is empty, so I choose the second to last row and hope luck is on my side. I take the window seat and scan the onboarding passengers for an imposing personality to claim the aisle. Perhaps a 7-foot-tall man who no one would want to be crowded next to, or a mother and her newborn. Then I spot him, my perfect seatmate. He's in his 50s and escorted by a flight attendant. His entire leg up to his waist, mummified in a cast, his arm in a sling. When the attendant lowers him in the aisle of my row, I can scarcely believe my luck. I feel sorry for him, his leg stuck into the aisle like a loose tree root, but also secretly thrilled. We smile, murmur hellos. I want to ask what happened, but don't want to be rude. It isn't until we reach cruising altitude that we make eye contact. What a way to fly, I say, my confidence buoyed from having achieved my seating goals. Now I can relax, be cordial, neighborly. I had, after all, my middle seat buffer. I can't imagine how uncomfortable that is. Yeah, he chuckles, and then, truck flipped over me in Africa. Chad. My eyes widen, and before I can respond, he says, "You know, my counselor tells me if I sit next to a person like you who seems interested, I should talk about my life. Don't carry it all on me." I feel a sudden curious kinship to this man. I also have a counselor. She's been empowering me to fly. Maybe we have something in common. Oh, I say, well. Then my seatmate tells me about his life. His name is Lee, and he didn't work for the military or the government. They call us honeybees, he says, without clarifying who they are. Just like there are rules to flying, there are rules to conversation, and I want to follow them by showing curiosity. I fail instantly. Like private securities, I ask? No, Lee says, and I feel my seatbelt tighten into my abdomen in a small surge of bile. I'd taken a subtle misstep and there is nowhere to go. Not off this plane, not into the aisle, not without crossing over Lee and his leg, and the seatbelt sign is still on. But Lee isn't deterred. Maybe his counselor told him to be patient with people. We work with kids, he says. We get them out of really awful situations. And women, men too, whatever, if they're there. He licks his lips and juts his chin up, his neck strained under the weight of the sling. I was supposed to get this group to France, he says. Now I need to count on my boys to do it. The team's young, though, and you're a woman, so you get why I'm worried. Yeah, I say. I think about it more now because of my daughters, Lee continues. I love my boys over there, but I'm losing sleep about leaving them alone. Yeah, I say. I appreciate you listening, Lee says. It's just how men are. If when we leave this plane you have a nice ass, I'm gonna look at it, you know? There are specific rules you're supposed to follow when someone talks about your ass, but I can't remember any of those, so I just twist the air nozzle above me, and I check to make sure the seat pocket has a vomit bag, even though I already checked when I sat down. In the seat pocket, I notice my headphones. Excuse me, I say, nervous flyer. Lee nods. Flying doesn't bother me, he says. Not after a lifetime of jump seats. Now, I should just escape into my headphones, but we've already taken the conversation past where it should be, and I suddenly say to Lee, I'm not afraid of flying. It's the whole process of airports. It's a control thing. It's being in my seat, but I'm not afraid we'll die. And then my lucky seatmate tells me he doesn't think about dying either. After you snuff a light out of the universe, he says. He's welling up, and maybe he's on pain pills or filled with remorse, or maybe his counselor told him to cry, or maybe he's a total liar. I don't know. When you take a light and you're the reason it's not there, you don't think about yourself anymore. I put on my headphones, but don't play any music. I think about my seating methodology and where it's left me, boxed in with Lee, who couldn't control the fate of his France-bound refugees, with his mummy leg and a porthole of sky filled with clouds. I pretend I'm sitting in a seat in a movie, theater, and that sitting there, just like this for hours, is very normal. I close my eyes. After a while, I do throw up, and just like it always does, the paper bag feels warm in my hand. When I finish, Lee turns to me and says, "Eventually, you'll get used to that." Thank you.
Thank you, Fallon. How do I get the phrase warm bag of vomit out of my head now?
It's a visceral memory, Judee. I carry it with me always.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So our next beautiful reader, Olivia Dolphin, is a poet, writer, and oversharer from Providence, Rhode Island. Her work ranges from dealing with current events, the resiliency of landscapes, and a constant obsession with Harry Potter. She is also the founder and editor-in-chief of Wizards in Space Literary Magazine, which aims to create safe and inclusive publishing spaces for writers to share their original works and true magic. You can follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Livy Doll or at Wizards in Space Magazine. Please welcome Olivia.
Hi, everyone. Wow. Okay. First of all, these two stories have been great. I knew this night was gonna be awesome, but I didn't expect to laugh so much. So, I just big shout out to Stranger Stories for always curating these incredible events. And I'm already having a blast. So, okay, this is an essay I wrote called Harry Potter and the Time I Made an Entire Airplane Cry for Me. If there's one thing you should know about me, it's this. I like Harry Potter, and not in a cute way. I went to every midnight release as soon as I was old enough. I remember the warm-toned lightings of Borders, the scent of new books, and the big welcoming rugs. Listening to the excited chatter in the store as people got their books one by one and left to devour them. Growing up, Harry Potter was the string that connected me to like-minded folks. It's how I discovered those like-minded folks, a shared language I had with teachers and my family and strangers who would eventually become friends. I could spot Harry Potter merch from miles away, and I knew if I was with someone who liked Harry Potter, I was in good company. As the hype around the final book release grew, my obsession with the boy who lived only got more intense. And it seemed like I wasn't alone. The entire world had been captivated. The excitement was a palpable energy in the air, and every storefront had promotional material in it. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, July 21st, 2007. And I was nervous. My parents had booked a trip to San Francisco the week before the release. I made it very clear that I needed to be back in Rhode Island, back at my local Borders, and back with all my friends to celebrate this once-in-a-lifetime event. Through the confusions of time zones and what midnight on the 21st actually meant, was it midnight on the 20th or midnight on the 21st, we would be flying home the day of the release. I told myself it would be okay. We would land at about 10 p.m. and head right to Borders, and just as the energy in the store was reaching its peak and holding the book in my hands would only be an hour away. What could go wrong? We boarded the plane. I clicked my seatbelt into place, and we waited. The doors had closed, but the plane had yet to move. We waited. We had a connecting flight to make in Chicago O'Hare, but instead, we sat on the tarmac for 2 hours. 2 whole hours, because one of the bathrooms wouldn't work. It didn't matter that I was 16. It didn't matter that there was an entire plane full of people around me. It didn't matter. I have never cried so loudly in my entire life than in that moment. The moment I realized I wouldn't be at Borders at midnight for the most monumentous book release in the entire history of all the books. That weeks and months and years of my life and all the high school projects and new friendships and hours on the internet reading fan fiction and prediction theories would all come down to me sitting on an airplane while everyone else got to stand together and hold that book in their hands at midnight. So I wailed. I howled. I screamed my throat raw. It was loud. It was ugly. And I didn't care. When I looked at my mom, she was crying too. She knew how important this was to me, and we'd never thought it'd go down like this. It was nobody's fault that this was the way the chocolate frog cards fell for me. And my mother never once told me that I shouldn't be crying or that I should quiet down. I was devastated, inconsolable, and in absolute disbelief. The flight attendant asked my mother if everything was all right, which of course just made me cry more. The longer we sat on the tarmac, the harder I cried. When the flight attendant came back to us with yet another update, tears were now in her eyes too. I am so sorry, she said. I am so, so sorry. Older women around me and kept asking my mother if I was okay, and they started crying when my mother explained. My father cried for me. My brother was asleep. Finally, the flight took off, and it was hell when we landed in Chicago. We had to rush to 3 different counters for U.S. Air to find my family a flight home. There were no flights that could fit us all. There were no flights left, only a standby flight that might be able to get us home in time for the release. I told my dad about this huge MuggleNet release party they were having in downtown Chicago. MuggleNet was the largest Harry Potter fan site that existed and my all-time favorite site to spend time on. So he begged the airlines money for transportation. They wouldn't budge. He begged them for a hotel so we could stay the night. They couldn't do that. Finally, he said, well, what about some food? The representative said, we can give you $5. Great, my dad said. Thanks, there's 4 of us. No, sir, I can give you $5 total. Shout out to US Air on that one. Out of options, out of flights, my family found a quiet corner next to a bookstore in all irony, and we began to wait. If we made our standby flight, it would be a red-eye, so I wouldn't have the book until the 22nd. Not having the book at all felt worse than missing any party. So my father popped into the bookstore to find out if they would be selling Deathly Hallows that night. There was a brown cardboard box sitting behind the register. My father eyed the box. Could it be? My father begged the bookstore lady to sell me a book early, which, if you remember, was under one of the tightest released embargoes ever. He promised I wouldn't open it until it was time because I wouldn't want to upset J.K. Rowling, and it would be unfair to all the other Harry Potter fans. But if he had to see his daughter be on a plane when the clock struck midnight and she was without this book, he would be broken. The bookstore lady, who I like to imagine was crying for me too, nodded and reached for the box, slowly pulling it open, ready to bring out Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in all its glory, even though she could lose her job and honestly probably go to jail. But we didn't tell her that. And what came out was tote bags. There were freaking tote bags in the box. And now I guess I have a limited edition Deathly Hallows tote bag, but that wasn't what I really wanted. Just as I was losing hope, I saw men in suits carting around white boxes with writing all over them with red scholastic logos and big letters that said, "Do not open until July 21st, 2007. Dad, I whispered, maybe yelled. Who knows? I don't know. Those are the books. My father and I sprang from our seats. We hunted down the men in suits, and turns out that one of them was the manager of the airport bookstores. He was tall, in charge, and annoying. I could tell he didn't care about me and my quest for this book, but we were welcome to follow him as they delivered the books until it struck midnight. But he wasn't sure if anyone would be around to even sell me the book. Even though he said we could follow him, he took a turn in this very large airport and vanished, and with him, the books. If only he had cried for me too. At this point, it's 11:59 and all hope is lost, but my dad did not give up. Further down the terminal, we found a bookstore with one lone person who had just finished arranging Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows into a gorgeous display. Through the cage that separated me from those glorious books, illuminated in lights and filled with everything I ever needed, we asked if she would sell us a book, and without hesitating, she said, of course. She lifted the gates, and I felt like she was lifting my soul from outside a dementor. I grabbed the first book I saw on the shelf, and we paid. I'll never forget the random guy that walked by at the right time and right place and said, "Are you open?" Like this wasn't the most miraculous moment of my life. And then he bought a book at midnight because he could. In that moment, it was terrible to not be surrounded by other diehard fans, not to have one last book party at Borders. May Borders rest in peace. It was painful to be without my friends. It was so disappointing. But I had my family who never once gave up on trying to make this night special for me. I had my family who understood how much Harry Potter meant to me and never tried to convince me otherwise. And I had that person in the bookstore who saw that I cared and sold me a book. Since 2014, I share this essay in some form every year on July 21st. 4 years after that, and 11 years after Deathly Hallows was released, I got a message on Twitter. Hi, the tweet starts. I'm the woman who sold you that Harry Potter book that night. I was thrilled to be able to sell the first copy to someone who cared as much as I did. If I remember correctly, I sold quite a few copies that night, so technically, you were surrounded by diehard fans, just in a huge space. And it's a reminder that whether in airports or airplanes, flying to something or flying away from something, there's always a way to be brought together, always someone looking out for you, even if it's just someone who loves Harry Potter as much as you. Thanks so much.
Olivia, I went through the full spectrum of human emotions hearing your story tonight. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. And at the time, I was so miserable and so upset that I didn't have this like amazing release party. But looking back, like that adventure and that moment just taught me so much. And then to have that woman reach out to me years later to say that it was her is just like an unbelievable development.
No, I love that. And it especially makes me think of, we had so much trepidation about, bringing these stories, like we're such a live show and bringing them virtually and on the internet. So the fact that you have this story about the ways we all connect, it's just so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much. And can't wait to hang out and listen to everyone else. I'll be in the comments with y'all.
Yes. Bye. Thanks, Olivia. So our next reader, Marianne Leone, is an actress, screenwriter, and essayist. Her essays have appeared in Boston Globe, Post Road, Bark Magazine, Coastal Living, Solstice, and WBUR's Cognoscenti blog. She is the author of 2 memoirs, Jessie and Ma Speaks Up. She had a reoccurring role on The Sopranos as my personal favorite character, Christopher Moltisanti's mother, Joanne, and she has also appeared in films by David O. Russell, Larry David, John Sayles, and Martin Scorsese. Please join us in welcoming Marianne.
Hi. Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I'm really enjoying these stories. Thanks for having me. And the one I want to read for you is from a memoir about my mom called Ma Speaks Up. My mother was from Italy. She came here to escape an arranged marriage and fascism, which seems ironic now. Anyway, this is about something this is the reason I write nonfiction mostly, is because you'll find when you hear the story, because if you told this in a fiction story, no one would believe it. So this is called Ma Picks a Priest. I rest my case. My sister Lindy thrust a statue of St. Anthony in my face, tick-tocking him like a metronome. St. Anthony was wearing a rakish pink scrunchie around his waist, stuffed with red and yellow artificial flowers. We were arguing about holy cards and which saint Ma would want on hers. I had pushed St. Rocco in honor of Ma's part-time job booking illegal numbers for the local wise guys. I remembered her telling me that St. Rocco was the patron saint of gambling. He was often depicted as a ragged man with bleeding leg sores being licked by a faithful dog. I later found out he was invoked to ward off infectious diseases. I supported my vote for St. Rocco with the fact that Ma had a statue of him right by her bed. My sister pointed out that St. Anthony was there too. So was St. Jude, a flame shooting out of his head like he'd just been electrocuted, and St. Francis decked out like a mad pigeon lady in Central Park with birds clinging all over his monk's robes, even covering his privates. But St. Anthony had the scrunchie with the flowers, and Ma had put it there herself. Look at him. He's decorated, my sister said. We both cracked up. Then we cried again. We had been on an emotional roller coaster for 2 days now, ever since Ma died suddenly at the age of 84. The doctors said it was a cerebral hemorrhage. She woke up with a headache and was dead by 2 in the afternoon. Ma would have liked the idea of leaving in such a hurry, like one of our childhood Christmas trees that was stripped and tossed every year the day after Christmas at her urgent behest. Now my brother, Michael, Lindy, and I were orchestrating the wake and funeral, checking off chores with the same haste as we used to devour desserts, Ma waiting impatiently to clear the dinner table. Apart from the quibble about her favorite saint, we knew exactly what to do. From birth to marriage to death, there was a clear trajectory if you lived in the lake, where the circle of life had a really tiny radius. You were baptized at Our Lady Help of Christians Church. You got your wedding dress at La Sposa. You were laid out across the street at Magnai's funeral home, and your funeral mass send-off returned you to Our Lady Help of Christians Church. No matter that Ma never went to church, except for weddings or funerals, no matter that Ma couldn't name who was the Monsignor of Our Ladies, nor the name of the current Pope, she wanted the grand send-off with every available rite, and that included her coffin carried down the main aisle of the church to rest before the high marble altar. She wanted organ music and eulogies and tears, as befitted her years on this planet, and you couldn't get that anywhere else. Andrew Magnai led us through the downstairs coffin display. We bypassed the over-the-top one with the carved version of The Last Supper on the cover, paused briefly by the hot pink number so my sister and I could instant eyebrow message each other, and settled finally on a shiny metal canister with a coppery glint. Back in his office, Andrew informed us that none of the regular priests at Our Ladies were available, and we would have a substitute from the next parish over, St. Bernard's, to say Ma's funeral mass. The name of the parish rang, a tiny distant bell muffled by my memory of Ma's last non-encounter with priests a few months before she died. We were at Newton Wellesley Hospital. Ma had complained of a headache and partial loss of vision in one eye, and the doctors wanted to make sure she hadn't had a small stroke. I stayed with her so that her spotty English language skills wouldn't make her seem unhinged to the medical staff. They were testing her mental competence with questions about what day it was, what month, and what year. She answered correctly. They asked her who was the current president that year, 2004. I can't remember his name, but I know he's a besta. I looked at the hospital personnel. You can't possibly question her sanity now. Nevertheless, the doctors decided to keep Ma overnight. They sent in a very young, squeaky-voiced hospital clerk who rattled off a list of questions in a fatally bored voice. Religious affiliation. Ma looked at me and shrugged. What's he want? He wants to know if you want to see a priest. Ma's voice was strong, resolute. No priest. I turned to Squeaky. You got that? No priest. Squeaky didn't realize that to my mother, it was as if he'd asked, and would you like to have a visit from the angel of death? Later, I settled Ma in her intensive care room. There were no beds available in the regular part of the hospital. She relaxed, lulled by the electronic wallpaper of the television mounted in the corner. Restless, I wandered in the hall. I stopped at the cubicle next door, arrested by the sound as a priest droned the Our Father to a frightened, demented old woman who was emitting cries of alarm like a baby bird dislodged from the nest. I edged closer. Home, home, the old woman cried. She lay huddled on her bed in a wilted heap, barely distinguishable from the bedclothes. The priest sat 4 feet away and recited his prayer as if he were alone in the room, as if he were direct dialing his old buddy God for a dinner date, as if the old woman were already dead. Ma was right about priests, I thought. About a month after the hospital visit, I was on a flight from Los Angeles heading home to Boston. We were in first class, courtesy of the studio that was promoting my husband Chris's film. I sat beside an entitled middle-aged guy who wasn't about to give up his window seat so I could sit with Chris. That was okay. Chris and I could survive 5 hours, one row apart. And we were in first class. Who was I to complain when there were warm cookies available and I had actual legroom? Just 6 rows back in economy gulag, there were cramped throngs with serious future chiropractor bills looming and no warm cookies. I didn't hold it against the window-hugging guy, and over lunch we made polite small talk. I asked him why he had been to LA. He said he was at a religious convention. Oh, really? What do you do? I asked brightly, with only a tinge of heartsink at the word religious. I knew that my own contentious nature and the 12 years I put in as a parochial school POW would inexorably draw me into talking about religion. I was a lemming inside of the cliff. I'm a priest, he said, with a kind of mock sheepishness, like he was revealing unwillingly his superpowers. I leapt off the cliff. I hope you don't think you're more spiritual than I am because you have a penis and can change water into wine. That came out so abruptly, I almost looked around to see who said it. The priest raised his arm for the stewardess like he was bestowing a blessing. I'll have a scotch, please. Over the next 5 hours, we discussed my theory of the imminent demise of the Catholic Church. Well, I scattershot bullet points at the priest and he dodged them. It was strange. I remembered the worshipful way the nuns would ask the priest if they would give us a blessing back in high school when they visited our classrooms. The nuns would duck their heads girlishly, and we students fell obediently in a thudding horde to our knees. They had a glamour then, the priests. They handled God every day. A tiny retro part of myself wanted the God spillover from the guy sitting next to me in the window seat. But I also wanted him to explain to me why any woman would want to join a club that from birth designated her as a second-class citizen. He talked about the programs he was involved in for troubled youth. I talked about the Magdalen laundries in Ireland, the Catholic-run slave labor institutions for unwed mothers that only closed in the 90s. I asked if his youth programs were like that. He kept ordering scotches. Even though he was the one drinking scotch, my memory of the rest of the discussion is hazy, although I know it touched upon my years of torment in parochial school, the priest pedophile scandals, and my gratitude to Renaissance cardinals for commissioning 3D pornography from artists like Bernini so that today we could view Italian sculptures of women in spiritual ecstasy, like Santa Ludovica and Teresa of Avila. Those once lustful women carved of stone made me think of Ma, her fierceness stilled forever, on display in her burnished copper casket. I remembered asking her on New Year's Day what her resolution was for 2004 and her growly answer, to be dead this year. And then her practiced hold for my laugh, her timing as polished as any late night comedian's, her pitch black humor, which had taken seed in the arid mountain soil of her impoverished girlhood, was as gnarled and twisted as the Montepulciano grape arbors of that region, and as dry and delicious as the dark wine they produced. I don't remember ever hearing a belly laugh from Ma. She favored the snort of derision, the head toss, the ha, that was more like a spoken confirmation that she got the joke. As measured as her own laughter was, she was sly about amusing her audience. She knew she was funny, but she always played it straight. She acted the innocent, watching us laugh, eyelids at half-mast, appraising the reactions. Ma would never make me laugh again, I thought. On the day of Ma's funeral, I entered the church just as the substitute priest was setting up shop for the Requiem Mass he was about to say. I squinted at the altar. I put my glasses on and looked again. It was my Scotch-drinking seatmate from the plane. I snorted with laughter, my laugh a replica of my mother's. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Marianne. I know a lot of people in the comments were giving a lot of love to that story and mentioning wanting to read your book. So I did just want to say the name of your memoirs again. So that selection is from Ma Speaks Up.
Yes.
Okay, and the second memoir is Jessie. So for anyone who wants to hear more from Marianne, which I think is most of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you. So this is the point in the live show where normally we read people's true stories that we've asked the audience to write and put in a submission jar. We cannot quite do that tonight, but we have asked folks to send us emails with their tiny true flight stories. So we're going
And we've got a few.
Yes. Judee, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, okay, let me pull one up here. Okay. One of my first flights was to San Francisco, freshman year spring break. We were all under 21 except for one guy, and I had a fake ID. The last night he and I went to a gay bar. He was so popular that the guys kept buying us drinks. I remember a pastor in a convertible drove us home, where I served them Cosmos in the hot tub. The next morning, we woke up to Cosmos all over the kitchen floor and a long flight solo back to Boston, since everyone else was on a different flight. On the plane, my neighbor had a sizzling plate of steak, pepper, and onions at 6 a.m. while we all had breakfast. It made me so nauseous and pale that the other seat neighbor rang the bell for the stewardess. She came over with a beer behind her back, asked my age, and then left, returning with a tank of oxygen. I'm thankful I didn't puke. Wow, it's really pulling on some themes of the evening.
No. Thank you for reading that, Judee. I can't say the phrase bag of puke anymore tonight. Okay, I will read one more and then we'll read a couple more later in the show. If you want to get your own tiny story in to be read anonymously, you can share that at strangerstoriespvd@gmail.com. At 18, I was working a crappy job in my small hometown, which I hated. One day, after getting yelled at for something I can't even remember, I got in my car and drove. A day later, I was in Colorado. I had never traveled or been anywhere. I quit my job and stayed there for a year. My fight or flight response kicked in and led me to one of the most life-changing journeys so far, and I wouldn't change it for anything.
Awesome. Thank you guys for submitting your little stories, and keep submitting. Fill up our virtual jar, our inbox.
Yes, please. So we have one more live reader tonight before we switch over to two other stories that have been shared with us for folks who are joining us even more virtually tonight through video. But I'm really excited to introduce this next reader who is currently on the screen with us. Judee Burr helped bring Stranger Stories into the world 2 years ago, and tonight is her last show as co-producer. Judee. So Judee is going on to great things. She's excited to announce that she will be joining the Interdisciplinary Studies Master's program at the University of British Columbia next fall. Her focus will include some work with the Spoken Web podcast on old recordings of poetry and literature. So she will still be engaging with stories read out loud, but I am going to miss having her co-producing this with me very much. Please welcome Judee.
Thanks, Fallon. Man, I've learned so much, laughed so much while co-hosting this series. Fallon, as you all know, is such an incredible writer and leader. And I'm so grateful that we had an Italian daughter connection across the table at the Frequency Writers essay class. I'm pumped for grad school, but I am definitely going to miss all of you. So here is my flight story. Jeremiah was on his way, and the set was not ready. How to make Neverland out of a board game covered basement in Coventry, a place where Peter could find the darlings and teach them to fly. Where would Captain Hook's ship be? Where would the Lost Boys be stationed? Who would finish drawing and coloring Skull Rock? We pulled the couch cushions onto the floor and used blankets to hide the other ordinary things like the TV and computer and stacks of books and papers. I went importantly from room to room, overseeing preparations and making pronouncements. What time was it? When was he coming? I had never met Cousin Jeremiah, my dad's nephew, or if I did, I didn't remember him. But he was the occasion, maybe the excuse, for this grand production. I was 8. I had a vision. I had 3 younger sisters and 2 parents. That is 5 ready-made actors. Never mind that Jenna was only a year in this world. Dad would play the villain. We loved to assign him the evil characters. Mom was the cameraman, a role she inhabited, whether or not someone was putting on a play. Jessica would be Wendy. She never seemed thrilled about these plays, but she did them. She loved me enough, and I was full of dramatic ideas. Then there was 4-year-old Joanna. John Darling, Tiger Lily, Mr. Smee? I think we cast her in multiple roles. Very versatile, that Joanna. And finally, 1-year-old Jenna would be placed gently on a flashlight as Tinkerbell. I would be Peter Pan, of course, in addition to my directing responsibilities. I had a small sword that would light up and a green costume that Dad remembers as surprisingly detailed and suited for the part. Where did we get that, he wonders now. When I asked Joanna, she somehow remembers it being an extra large baby onesie that my mom found, which I deny. Why does Joanna only remember embarrassing things? All I remember is that it was the right color, green, and I spent some time looking in the mirror and very seriously trying to make myself look right, to look like Peter Pan. When my Aunt Judee took me and my sisters years later to see Peter Pan on Broadway, I was delighted to learn that Peter is traditionally played by a woman. I was in good company. My family has always appreciated a good story. Peter Pan wasn't my only leading role. There was Jack and the Beanstalk, me as Jack, Dad as the Giant. There was the Burr family Anastasia in the works, me planning to be Anastasia, Dad as Rasputin. We never did get to that one. I always knew Dad would engage with my new play ideas. Maybe that's why I remember his roles most clearly. I should mention that my father's name is also Peter, and he has compared himself to a certain flying boy on more than one occasion. It's an apt comparison insofar as he was always taking us off to new worlds, like Peter Pan bringing children to Neverland. We would sit in the living room to read together. Dad's reading voice is serious and methodical and soothing. He always pauses at the right moments and never rushes through sentences. Sometimes I'd fall asleep while he was reading, like I always seemed to loll off when he read the Nth chapter in Lord of the Rings. But sometimes we would also take turns reading, and he would help me pronounce the words I didn't know. We ignored many overdue notices from the library. Dad also loved and still loves to sing, often songs with stories behind them. My sisters and I loved to roll our eyes at him as he unearths old jingle after old lullaby tune from his memory. I remember him leading us in a rendition of a Peter Pan song once as we sat in the van, probably driving to one of Mom's basketball tournaments. I won't grow up, I don't want to go to school, just to learn to be a parent and recite a silly rule. I find it notable, magic stories are often written for children or in collaboration with them, including Winnie the Pooh, The Hobbit, and Peter Pan. My mom was also in on this game of imagination. For years, she would show up in my elementary school classrooms with our costume box, ready to lead the students in plays like the ones we did at home. I loved it. We did The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in one class. In another, the class voted on roles, and I was thrilled to get voted to be Prince Caspian, the lead. It was my most democratic election compared to all the favoritism I showed myself at home. When Jeremiah finally arrived that day of the Peter Pan play, he was immediately put to work coloring in the set. He had reddish hair and a laughing face, one of those young adults who could quickly go from being a stranger to being a friend of children. We all wanted to talk to him, to tell him the important things in our lives. He was visiting from California. I told him all about the play as we colored in the dining room. I was anxious that the schedule had been altered, at being unprepared and forced to ask our sole audience member for set design assistance. But Jeremiah was gracious. He colored in Skull Rock. The play was a great success. We never memorized lines and we didn't practice. We had the gist of it from many Disney movie viewings and our Peter Pan sing-along tapes. We picked a scene from the movie and fearlessly threw ourselves into it. There were occasional arguments as the director broke character to say, "Jessica, what are you doing? Mom, get Tinkerbell. Now to the ship." Peter Pan and the Darlings danced around the basement, up and down the stairs, avoiding Captain Hook's clothes hanger hand. Wendy decided she didn't want to play anymore in the middle of the performance, but we talked her back into it. It was very avant-garde, blurring the separation between the performer, the Burrs, and our audience, Jeremiah, the real and the unreal merging. All in all, I was really more like Wendy than Peter, easily bewitched by the spell of an adventure story. If Peter Pan had come to my window, I would definitely have gone to Neverland. But I would have come back to not wanting to miss all the excitement. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Judee. You're making it very hard to let go of you. After.
I'll fly right back, don't worry.
Yes, well, if we stay virtual for a while, I'm going to be like, Judee, how busy are you tonight?
Right.
So we are going to switch gears a little for our last two readers tonight. And we are very excited to share this next video with you. So we first met this writer when he performed at our Moneymaker show last year, and I am certain that anyone who was there still remembers that story. Jeff SCHNEIDER is a writer, musician, and former well driller from Providence. Psychiatric Tissues, his memoir about the underground music scene and his time in the noise rock band Arab on Radar, has been reluctantly recognized by his current enemies and enthusiastically adored by his true friends. So I think we're cutting back to me while we get the audio going on that one. The other thing I'll say while we're queuing that video up is if you are going to read Jeff's book, Psychiatric Tissues, I definitely recommend the audio version of that book. It is quite entertaining. Let's see. And from the DoubleACS end, if you need more time to queue up that video, just send Judee and I a note. We do have another audience submission that we could read while you're loading it if you need.
And Uninterested by Jeff SCHNEIDER. After a failed coup d'etat attempt in 1992, followed later by a 2-year prison sentence, Hugo Chavez won the election in Venezuela on December 6, 1998, kicking off what would be called the Bolivarian Revolution. It was now 2004, and socialism for the 21st century was blooming in Venezuela. I was a socialist living in Rhode Island. I was in college. I worked at the library, deep in the stacks at my capitalist college. I was somehow dating Maria. Which one, you may ask, as there are many. Maria from Venezuela, of course. She had spent half the year living in Rhode Island, and the other half with her tia Maria in Caracas. She had money, so these 3-month jaunts were a vacation of sorts for her. It was crushing to me when she went home. I missed her so. And we'd only been dating for 2 months. AOL chatting and emailing were all we could do. When my lust-filled words were uttered over the phone, she'd yell out, "Well, get down here." To this, a person like me, I'm sure she would agree, was a mistake. In some hypomanic state, and probably after a double espresso, I wrote her and said in earnest that I'd be down there in a week, that my tickets had been bought. It took many more emails, perhaps over 1,000 words, to convince her that I had, in fact, booked plane tickets to Caracas, leaving out of Boston, arriving in a week. She tried subtly to talk me out of it, but my level of emotion was far too high. Boston to Miami had a scotch in the bar. Through the gate, I careened. On almost every flight I've ever flown alone, for whatever dumbass reason, perhaps to cope with my awkwardness and anxiety, I played this weird game. I'd kind of act as if I might be the sky marshal. Not overtly, but nonchalantly, looking around, just checking things out. An understanding nod or two at people boarding that made eye contact with me. I approved them to be seated. It was fucking bizarre, honestly. I landed fine, switched flights, Miami to Caracas, and through the air at 35,000 feet and 500 miles an hour in a hunk of metal, I soared to the Marias. The guy next to me sat in seat B. He grilled me with questions. He really checked me out, and even went to the extent to ask if I was on the wrong flight. Once he found out it was for love, he grinned. You fucking nuts, man, but I feel you, was the only positive thing he had to say. Everyone was cool on the flight. Headphones all over the plane blasted out the cumbia and reggae tone of the times. The whole cabin warmed up with loud chatter and the laughter of the Latin American nature. And the rumba on board began in full force. 15 minutes later, when what I figured out in my very limited Spanish to mean we will be landing soon, it was announced. A hush came over the cabin. Everyone on board, everyone, quietly began stripping off all of his or her jewelry. My new friend beside me took off his gold chain and stuck it in his shoe. I was puzzled. He pointed at my headphones and said, "Get rid of those, man." I got a little anxious. Necklaces rattled. People tucked their earrings in their bras. Bracelets in their socks. All sorts of hiding skills were innovated around me. We disembarked from the plane and entered the corridor into Simon Bolivar International Airport. Many people put their hands up over their head ahead of the time, walking like prisoners into this austere domain. As we shuffled on towards the gate, a lackadaisical bunch of military soldiers stood in a half circle ahead of us. One guard was smoking a cigar, indoors, which I thought was weird. And all of them had menacing features. And even more menacing AK-47 Kalashnikov rifles mounted across their sweaty chests. Suddenly, I was up to bat. The guy I was assigned to was yelling at me and poking my chest. I couldn't understand a word of what he was saying. I recall something along the lines of him wanting me to exchange currency, my US dollars for Venezuelan bolivars. I told him I couldn't and began sneezing violently due to his cigar smoke in my face. He shoved me aside forcefully. El loco was the word I detected being directed at me repeatedly. I think they assumed my sneezing fit was some sort of spasm. This ad-lib tactic of feigning insanity was employed a few more times in the hours to follow. It was 4 a.m., And of course, Maria didn't wake up until 10 a.m. Anyway, on the drive to Tia Maria's home, Maria repeatedly reminded me, Tia is a respectful woman. Tia is upstanding in this community. Tia's well off. Tia's Catholic. And Tia is the boss here. Claro, I said. I took the mild scolding in the best way possible, as I was jet-lagged and sort of in love. Driving into the rich neighborhood known as Miranda, we zipped through the gate and past the armed guard at Tia Maria's complex. The place seemed like any old Sheraton hotel. I dutifully adhered to Tia's rules and slept on Tia's couch. A rather uncomfortably hard, uneven leather couch in a state of severe sexual repression. The next morning, I was microwaving a chicken arepa in the kitchenette and overheard cackling laughter ongoing between the Marias. This progressed to pointing in my direction. Eyes crying laughter. I demanded to know what Tia Maria was saying. She says, "You're no Spanish guy staying on the couch all night like that." They cracked up again, dejected from the momentary turbulence, but quickly recovering to my baseline optimism. I went to pack for our day trip. We had to get out of this socialist revolution environment. There was no sense hiding in a bourgeoisie apartment complex all day. And Maria wanted to go to the beach. We took a small flight on a Cessna 172 single engine, 4-seater plane, out to the Margarita Island area. And then took a small John boat rowed by a nice old fisherman out to a very small island called Isla Huerta. Soft, white sand, breeze, palm trees, and perfection surrounded us. We'd been dropped off in paradise. We rolled out a blanket, and I cracked open a nice cold bowl of beer. Out of the bushes crawled this very dirty Pastafarian guy. This chap came up to us as if he hadn't seen a human being in weeks. I guess he lived out there or something. He had shells woven into these dreadlocks and sky blue eyes. He said he'd been born in Pittsburgh. WTF, I thought to myself. He sat right down on our blanket, which I assumed was some cultural norm. He and Maria spoke for a long time, loud and fast in Spanish. I grinned, missing 95% of the words and the gist of the conversation entirely. She offered them one of our beers. They sat closer and closer, intimately laughing in conversation, and sometimes whispering in each other's ears. They migrated across the blanket together. I'd had enough when I glanced to see this Manu Chao wannabe running his fingers under the back tie of her bikini string. No good. I got up abruptly. No one noticed. And I announced loudly that I was going to take a dip. She kept talking to him and waved a limp-wristed flick of her hand at me, granting me permission, non-verbally, to leave this cuckold. Probably subconsciously, I decided to display some act of dominance. I ran furiously down the beach to the water's edge, soared high up in flight, arms spread to my sides, and dove into the turquoise water below. What I had assumed was soft sand beneath the waves was in fact hard stone. I had kamikaze myself into the solid rock of the coral reef. I stood up reeling and bleeding, babbling something like, "Oh, fucking shit," through my smashed in face. Panic set in. Did I break my jaw? How the hell were they going to airlift me out of this weird island on the equator? Will Maria just leave me here? Will I die? Eventually, we were rowed back, and we drove home in silence. I flew back to the States earlier than planned, but physically intact. Nothing broken but my heart. On the flight home, with an inflamed jaw, speechless, I sat in seat B. My neighbor in C was undeniably fumbling in his shoe with some electronic device that anyone else would have assumed was suspicious, without a doubt. I just sat back, sipped my scotch, and did not pretend to be the Sky Marshal this time whatsoever.
Don't be the Sky Marshal that time.
I know. Oh my gosh. I wish we could. I know Jeff is watching on YouTube. Jeff, awesome job. Thank you so much for sharing that video and creating the ambiance in the garage.
Absolutely. So do we got a couple, maybe one more true story from the audience, you think?
Yeah, so yep, we've got one more true story. Judy's going to share that, and then we have one more reader who will be joining us through video, and that'll be it.
Ah, so sad. Okay, but let me bring in this tiny true submission into our virtual jar from the audience. This is a virtual flight story. Took a vacation with my, at the time, brand new boyfriend. He hated air travel, but was not really upfront about that at the time. We were in the pie-eyed early stage when a trivial thing like disclosing our differences was not yet important. We drove the Pacific Coast Highway, roamed Los Angeles and San Francisco for a couple of weeks, and when it was time to come home, we caught a cheap flight from Oakland to Vegas to make a connecting red-eye to Providence, which was delayed, and delayed again, then canceled. On a good day, the Vegas airport is a nightmare. Hungover gamblers with empty pockets, nervous bachelor parties swearing to keep each other's secrets upon returning to their small-town wives, impulsive newlyweds questioning their recent decisions. We were stuck, tired and sunburned, people watching until morning. Did I mention that he hated traveling? This is about the time that I began figuring it out. At 7 a.m., our new flight was announced and we lined up to board. The two women in front of us were a little too heavily made up for the crack of dawn. Think glowing fake tans, big newscaster hair, and thick mascara. From the back, I could tell that they were wearing some sort of shimmering pageant sash, but it was not until we were sitting in the dark on the plane that we would find out who these two celebrities were. Mrs. Massachusetts and Mrs. Rhode Island, of course, returning from some exhibition of beauty and talent in Sin City. The flight crew turned all the cabin lights on without notice, and 150 exhausted travelers were shocked into participating in an impromptu meet and greet. As if that were not enough, we were treated to a brain-shattering rendition of The Greatest Love of All by Mrs. Massachusetts, which she generously performed over the staticky plane PA system as her husband stood on the arm of a seat and lovingly documented the entire thing. "This is why I don't travel," new boyfriend said. More plane mishaps.
It could be 2 shows, really.
I know.
Great.
All right. So I think it's time to introduce our last reader. Thank you for everyone who's stuck with us throughout the show. It's been incredible bringing this whole lineup to you. And it feels right to end the show tonight with a story that takes us to the other side of the world. Our final reader, Karen Waterman, is an art and antique appraiser who wrote a column for East Bay newspapers for 4+ years. She loves listening to stories and decided it was time to tell one of her own. So here's a recording from Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Waterman, and the name of my story is Transcendental Flight. Transcendental is defined as relating to a spiritual or non-physical realm. Life is a journey, and we make choices at every fork in the road, each taking us in a new direction and lead us to what we become. We feel we're the ones in charge of our destiny, but are we? In June 1989, I was sitting in a restaurant in Boston with a client and friend named Vino when he said he was planning on going home to Thailand to visit some family and travel. I heard myself say, "Can I come?" I didn't even realize the words had left my mouth. I had already decided this was the worst year of my life. In February, I broke off my engagement to my fiance, who I'd been discovered had been cheating on me. I found his diary in the bottom of his laundry basket, which contained his confession and question if we should get married. In May, the company I'd been working for was apparently having financial problems, and I lost my job. My boss took my position and I was let go. A couple weeks after that, I totaled my brand new car. I wanted to believe that bad things come in threes and things couldn't possibly get worse. I decided I needed an escape and have some time to figure out what direction I should go with my life. I had nothing tying me down, so why not go to Thailand for a month? When would I get the opportunity to do something like this again in my life? I sold my engagement ring and bought my plane ticket. Vino and I had met on an interesting project in Boston for a very demanding Japanese client. Vino was the designer and I sold the furniture. We spent a lot of time together on the job and then got together occasionally for lunch. He, his father, and brother had emigrated to the United States years ago, and Vino completed his education here. His mother and extended family had remained in Thailand. A bit complicated, but he didn't get into it too much. Walking out of the airport in Hong Kong, we were greeted with 100-degree weather with what felt like 100% humidity. After flying all night long, we were exhausted. We checked into our closet-sized hotel room and took a nap before venturing out to explore the city. The sounds, smells, and sights were something I'd never experienced. At over 7 million people, Hong Kong is one of the most dense cities in the world where there's extreme wealth and poverty everywhere you look. We took in the sights, including a rickshaw ride, went to a restaurant specializing in making their own noodles, and had dim sum from the carts women rolled around the restaurant. We traveled by hydrofoil to visit the island of Macau, which is featured in James Bond movies and known for their casinos. On to Bangkok. Bangkok is a huge, sprawling city with oppressive traffic 24 hours a day. We took a cab to Vino's mother's house, which was within the city limits of Bangkok. It took hours. She was thrilled to see him and less thrilled to meet me. She was worried we were in a relationship and did not want her son to marry a Farang, the word for foreigner, especially from the United States. She didn't speak English, but it was clear from her mannerisms and body language that she did not like me and spoke to Vino about me in Thai, right in front of me. Vino did what he could to assure his mother, and we got out to see the city. I was his excuse to see all the sights and not spend all of his time with family. He confessed he had never had the time to see much of Thailand because whenever he was home, he would spend all of his time visiting relatives. I felt awkward and I couldn't wait to leave his mother's house. She leered at me every morning and was obviously still very upset with Vino. In Bangkok, we toured the Royal Palace, saw a kickboxing match, went to museums and outdoor markets. We met up with some old friends of his, and I learned a bit about some of their customs, particularly concerning the economic classes that exist there. One of the friends offered to drive Vino, his mother, and I north to visit his grandmother at her village. It would take hours to get there, and we would all need to spend the night at his grandmother's house. We got to the village on the river and walked the narrow path to the house, which sat on stilts above the water. The one-room thatched roof house was open to the elements and had no furniture but some low benches around the edges of the room. On the floor were woven mats. We all bowed and gave greetings of Sawadika to Vino's grandmother, aunt, and uncle. Lunch was served and we sat on the floor to eat. Vino advised me on what I could safely eat, which was not much, so we brought some water and food with us. I could not speak Thai, so I felt lost as they all caught up on family and the village gossip. The only thing I did understand was when his aunt kept touching my hair and looking at my eyes. Perhaps she'd never seen a Westerner before. We took a couple of the mats and mosquito netting out on the porch where we would sleep on the floor. The river acts as a highway and the traffic continuous with large barges going up and down the river. It was a long, sleepless night. Our plan was to travel north to Chiang Mai, and Vino's aunt and uncle offered to take us on their longboat to Ayutthaya, where Thailand's 3 largest rivers intersect. Ayutthaya was the capital city of Siam until it was ransacked by the Burmese and moved to Bangkok. There are acres of ruins to explore, including palaces, temples, and huge Buddhas. From there, we would take an overnight train to Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is an ancient city in northern Thailand. It's a tourist destination and the home of many cottage industries, including silk weaving, carved teak furniture, and hand-painted fans. It's also a large agricultural area, and there are a lot of gemstone mines there. By this time, Vino had made it clear to me his feelings and professed he wanted our relationship to be more than friends. He tried to kiss me. I felt nothing. I told him I was not ready to be in a serious relationship with anyone. I really did not want this to get in the way and ruin our trip. From then on, he seemed to have a puss on his face and a short temper. I did my best to get him to lighten up. He just kept asking me, "Why aren't you attracted to me?" Ugh. When we arrived in Chiang Mai, we found a cheap hotel. We visited an elephant camp and rode out elephants throughout the jungle. We fed the elephants bananas, and I held a spider monkey. We went on a rafting trip down a narrow river on a raft made of bamboo links lashed together. It was fun and something I knew I would remember always. Chiang Mai is also home to one of the most sacred temples in Thailand. We climbed the 300 steps between 2 dragons to reach the enormous gold-covered temple called a Wat in Thai at the top of the mountain. The temple supposedly has one of Buddha's shoulder bones and attracts devout Buddhists from all over the world. While enjoying the view from the top of the mountain, Vino again tried to talk about our relationship. He even suggested we get married and stay in Thailand. We could have a good life here. Oh yes, and that wonderful mother-in-law. When we descended the mountain, we saw a monk sitting outside a small tent telling fortunes. I decided to have my fortune told. The monk could not speak English, so Vino had to translate for me. Vino reluctantly acted as translator and told me what the monk said. He said I would soon meet the man who would become my husband. He had dark hair and was very tall. Vino is not tall. He knew it was not him and acted like it was silly to believe any of it. A dark cloud hung over our remaining time in Thailand, and when we came back to the States, we parted and spoke a few more times before he disappeared from my life. I got home and found my problems were still there, but seemed a lot smaller now. I got a new job in a month, and late December, I joined a friend for a ski trip in Maine. My friend said we could stay at a condo his friend was renting. We got to the condo, and his friend answered the door. He was tall with dark hair. We've been married for 30 years. The end.
Love a good fortune told twist.
Judee,
Oh, you're on
know,
mute, Val.
I know. So Judee, you know, fortune telling speaks to me. Terrific ending. And Karen, thank you so much for submitting and sharing with us. So that is the show, everyone. Thank you, DoubleACS TV 15, for hosting us. And thank you to the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts, who has supported this show through a grant for the last 2 years. We are so thankful for the support. To stay connected with Stranger Stories, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Stranger Stories PVD, and visit our website at strangerstoriespvd.com. And we will see you next time, whenever that may be.
We'll keep you updated. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Fallon. Love.
Thank you, Judee. Thank you, Austin.
Be safe out there. Wash your hands.
Good night, everyone.